This is Chris.
This is Nick, and the Midnight Tapes presents
The B-Sides.
Brent was 18 and was about to start college at the time, but had decided to go on a road trip beforehand. Now, Brent decided to make the trip from his hometown in California to Denver, Colorado, with the intention of visiting a friend there. Unfortunately, Brent didn't have much money at the time, and his parents weren't keen on the idea, but not wanting to intrude, they didn't stop him. During the drive somewhere in the wilds of Nevada, Brent realized the drive was going to take much longer than previously thought. Feeling tired, he parked the car and was a bit creeped out since the area had no lighting at all, and as a result, it was pitch black. It was there he drifted off to sleep. Brent reported awaking to a light tapping on the window and said there was a young man peering in the car. He described this person as being fairly skinny and thought that this individual must have been in his late teens. Brent also said that he was dressed normally and at first didn't seem particularly threatening in any way. Obviously dazed and confused, Brent questioned what the man wanted. The teen calmly said, "Open the door." Brent, panicking now, said that suddenly he was flooded with an overwhelming sense of danger and obviously said no. The teen then demanded again that Brent opens the door. At this point, Brent noted that the teen wasn't alone and that he was accompanied by two others who were lurking nearby in the background. Now this is where things get bizarre. Initially, Brent reported that he thought it was kids trying to mess with him, so he took out a knife, allowing these strangers to see it in hopes that it would scare them away. However, this didn't work and infuriated the teen, who must have known that there was no way Brent was opening the door. Brent went on to note that this teen let out an incredibly chilling and intense wail and began to hit and shove the car, which shook it, and Brent said he felt the car lift from the ground slightly. He said that it was an incredible display of strength and that he would have never expected it from a person, let alone someone who was so thin. The car came to a stop, and it was at this moment of panic that he noted that two of the people with him also had something very strange about them. Brent reported that their eyes were either glowing or reflected light of the moon, and that they were somewhat blurry or fuzzy. One of them appeared to be a girl, and without warning was now right beside the car alongside the teen. This again made him jump, and he noted that she did so in the blink of an eye before requesting that he open the door. At this point, Brent snaps out of his panic and shock. He started the car, but said that he was nearly paralyzed in fear with the thought that they may have tampered with it in some way, preventing it from starting. Fortunately, the car did start, and Brent quickly sped away as fast as his car would allow. Now, if things were already strange enough, Brent reported that again he was gripped with an intense fear and noticed that one of them was now running alongside the car, and he was going around 40 miles per hour, banging on the car window with increasing force. Brent floored it around 50 miles per hour, and it was at this point where this entity began to fall behind and eventually faded in the darkness. Brent drove and drove until he came across a populated diner where he stayed there for 3 hours, shaking and filled with adrenaline. He never told his friend or police about this incident, as he didn't think they would believe his encounter, and decided it would be the best if he remained quiet. To this day, Brent remains adamant he was telling the truth and still has no explanation as to what these beings were or why it happened.
I believe I've encountered a black-eyed kid before. I've never mentioned this particular detail about the eyes to anyone, for fear that they would think I'm fabricating a story or going crazy. This incident took place about 13 years ago. I had just moved into the new city with my wife. We were small-town newlyweds from the Midwest, and we moved across the country to one of the biggest cities in the Southwest so I can attend graduate school. Being naive to the new city living, I would answer the door without a second thought, but never again after this. The first thing that should have tipped me off to the oddness of the situation was the fact that someone was knocking at 6 a.m. in the morning. The second thing that dawned on me is that this kid had to reach over a rather tall patio gate to unlatch and open it. The knock on the door was startling. My wife and I were getting ready for work. Pretty normal routine at the moment. I opened the door. I was overtaken with a sense of fear. To this day, I can picture him. Teenager, average height, average build, knee-length black sweater coat, sort of black hair, and sunglasses. The sunglasses at 6 a.m. struck me as odd, and even more odd, he was eating an apple. He was very polite and asked if he could come in to warm up. I told him no, and I closed the door and slid the security chain into place. A moment later, another knock. I opened the now chained door. Before I could speak, he asked me if he could come in again to warm up. No, I replied, and attempted to close the door. Before the door could shut, he put his hand out, stopping the door at its hinges. He looked me directly in the eyes, still wearing the sunglasses, and said, "Can I at least get some ketchup for my apple?" "Screw that," I replied, being completely confused. "Get the hell out of here. My wife is calling the police." He takes a moment to let the information sink in and lowers his glasses, revealing extremely black eyes. "No, you won't be calling anybody." At that moment, I forced the door closed and I locked it. I called my wife. She was screaming shitless and hiding in the bedroom, all jacked up on adrenaline. I ripped the curtains back to look out the window. Next to the door, he was gone. Absolutely no trace of him. I go onto the patio and check the gate. It's still latched from the inside. That's not right, I think to myself. And I turn to enter the house when I notice the half-bitten apple laying on the ground.
I made the mistake of letting black-eyed kids inside, and now I'm worried that I might die because of it. I hope this will be a warning to anyone who is ever in the position to make the same mistake I did. I live outside of a rural town in Vermont. It is a tight-knit community where everyone knows one another and people don't lock their doors at night. There's never been any need to. A little over a year ago, I woke up because I heard a loud banging on my front door. At the time, my husband and I lived in a small home on a dirt road just off a rural route into town. It was the middle of a snowstorm, and the nearby hills get very slippery in the snow, so I thought that someone might have been in an accident and broke down. It happened before. When I looked out the window, I could see that a motion spotlight was on. I could see that there's footprints in the snow that had come from our road into our driveway, but there was no car anywhere. The snow was still covering the road, and no one had driven on it for at least a couple hours. Our front door was obscured from the window, but I could still see that someone was standing there. I wasn't sure what to think, so I woke my husband up just to feel safer. While I was telling him what was going on, the banging on the door started again, and my husband went to answer while I stood in the hallway. When he opened the door, there were two children standing there, in the snow, looking toward the ground. They were a boy and a girl, could not have been more than 8 years old. They were dressed strangely and had odd haircuts. The girl's was very long and straight, and the boy had a dated haircut that looked almost like a bowl cut. They weren't dressed for winter, and my first thought is that they must have been Mennonite children. But as far as I know, there was never a large community of Mennonites near us. Thinking back on it, I know that my normal reaction to seeing children in the snowstorm would have been to rush them inside, bundle them up with some blankets and hot cocoa, but that's not how I felt. These children were unnerving. They would not make eye contact, and when my husband asked if everything was okay, they asked if they could come in. My husband looked at me like, what do I do? And I asked the kids where their parents were. "They'll be here soon," is all they said. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning at this point, so the only reasonable thought in my head was that there must have been an accident or these kids got lost. As much as my instincts told me not to bring them inside, I did so anyway. I went into the kitchen to make them some hot cocoa while my husband took them in the living room. While I was fixing the kettle, I could hear my husband talking to the kids. He was asking if they were okay, where they came from, how far they walked, if their parents' car was broken down, things like that. But they always answered, "Our parents will be here soon." They spoke in a sing-songy voice. They weren't afraid to be in a stranger's home at all. I started to notice that our cats, we had 4, were all hiding, except one who was in the kitchen with me. Normally our cats are very curious and friendly, and we have to be careful that they don't run out the door when we leave. But this time, none of them even tried to see who was here, which I thought was very strange. All of the hair on our cat's neck was standing up, and his tail was puffed up while he had hid himself under the kitchen island. I've never seen him do that before. When I walked back into the living room, these kids were sitting on the couch as still as can be, but my husband was holding his head in his hands. I asked him what was wrong, and he said that he just felt very dizzy all of a sudden, but that he was fine. I turned back the children to give them their cocoa, but when they looked at me, I gasped. It took everything inside of me not to drop the mugs and run away. When they looked at me, their eyes were completely black. They had no whites, just giant black pupils. When they saw that I was scared, they stood up and asked if they could use the bathroom. I tried to be as composed as I could be and showed them down the hall. They went into the bathroom together, and I hurried back to my husband to ask him if he had seen their eyes. He'd seen them too, and said that it looked like his brother's badly bruised eyes after a car accident. We were in the middle of talking about whose children they could be when my husband's nose started to bleed. He'd never had nosebleeds as long as I'd known him. I just knew inside myself that it had something to do with these kids in the bathroom, and I started crying while I ran to get my husband some tissues. That's when the power went out. I heard my husband yell my name from the living room, and as I started to walk back into the hallway, I stopped dead in my tracks. The two children were standing at the end of the hallway. They weren't moving, and I've never been so scared in my whole life. They just stood there in the dark. After what felt like forever, the boy said, "Our parents are here." And they walked to the door, opened it, and walked out, leaving it wide open. My husband jumped to go close it and almost fell over. We looked out the window and saw two men standing by a black car idling at the end of our driveway. The men looked like they were wearing black-colored suits and were very tall, at least 6 feet. When my husband waved at them, they just stared at us, got into their car, and drove off. Our power came on about a half an hour later, but nothing was the same after that. Over the next few months, 3 of our cats went missing. We can only assume they ran away somewhere and never came back, but the worst thing was coming home to find one of our cats in a puddle of blood in the living room floor. He looked like he had been vomiting blood. The vet told us he had some kind of hemorrhage. After my husband's nosebleeds became a regular occurrence, we went to see the doctor. He didn't know what to make of it other than dry nasal passages, but my husband was diagnosed with an aggressive skin cancer. When the doctor asked us if he had used tanning beds, we both thought he was joking. Since we let the black-eyed kids inside our home, I've also suffered from regular dizzy spells and nosebleeds on a regular basis. I've had other issues which I won't mention here, but trust me when I say I am suddenly in the worst condition of my life, and no one can do anything about it. I know that all of this is because I let the black-eyed children in my home. We've told everyone we could about the strange kids that showed up that night, but no one else saw them, and some laugh at how scared we were of the Mennonite kids, but we know what we saw. I wish my husband never opened the door.